G'day humans, welcome back to what is fast becoming a semi-annual tradition here on Uncomfortable Conversations. One of my favourite regular guests on my radio show, who is now a frequent contributor here in the Uncomfortable Conversations lair, is the one and only Gary Kennedy, who is one of the greatest food scientists and food safety experts in the Asia Pacific, travels all over the region, advising companies and governments on how not to kill people accidentally through the food supply. Hello, Gary.
Hi, Charles.
We are taking questions live on Substack, video, streaming, all over the globe. So ask your questions in the comment well if you're watching us live. Gary, I love and cherish all of the conversations that we have had over the years.
I hope I've taught you well, grasshopper.
We already have a ton of questions.
Yep.
Can we just start with the basics?
Sure.
I just asked ChatGPT what the most popular meat that is eaten on Christmas Day is in the United States.
Yes. I would guess turkey.
Ham is number one.
Ham is
because
the
they
one.
just had their turkey.
Yeah, they did Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Turkey is number two. Should we just talk briefly about if I've left the ham out for Christmas lunch and it's been 3 hours at room temperature and everyone's been carving it and eating pieces?
The magical number is 2 hours and 4 hours.
Okay.
So if it's meant to be hot because you baked the ham,
yeah,
or it's meant to be cold because you brought it out the fridge, because people serve it both in Australia.
Yeah.
So whether it's meant to be hot or meant to be cold, you can leave it out for 2 hours. And after 2 hours, you can make a decision. It either gets recooked or goes back in the fridge, or you leave it out. And once you've hit 3 hours, you might as well leave it out, because at 4 hours,
you're past the 2 hour magic.
You're past the 2 hour magic point, and at 4 hours, you're actually meant to bin it.
So no more so I can't put it back in the fridge after 2 hours is gone? Is that what you're saying?
No, yeah, once it's hit 2 hours, you've sort of hit a point at which the bugs that are on it are starting to grow.
Right.
And some of the bugs that are growing are not just the ones that will make you sick if you eat them. You're also producing some of the bugs at room temperature that actually produce a poison. So reheating or putting them back in the fridge won't get rid of the poison.
This is an important thing that I learned from you that many people don't understand. There are two kinds of food poisoning.
There's two ways to get sick.
There's the live animals, and then there's the toxins that they have, some of them have produced.
Yes. Yeah.
And
you know, toxins, people would probably know you sometimes don't eat tropical fish because algae cause a toxin. And people know poisonous mushrooms produce toxins. But there are also bacteria that produce toxins as well.
Okay, got it.
Turkey, same as ham. In fact, pretty much the 2 hour, 4 hour works for everything. So again, turkey sits out for 2 hours. You should then put it back into the fridge, or if it's hot, put it into some warming tray. That's why in things like truck stops and buffets and things, hot dog stands, everything's kept above 60 degrees. I think it's 63 in the US. But when we keep it above 60, because nothing...
Celsius.
Celsius.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not good enough to remember. I am old enough to have dealt with Fahrenheit, but don't remember it. Right. So if you keep it above 60, nothing grows.
Right.
So
probably like 140 or 150.
Yeah, it's about 100. Yeah, it's about 140 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, okay. So, now, you just mentioned truck stops.
Yes.
So you stop at the truck stop.
Yes.
And you pick up what we call in Australia your bachelor's handbag.
Yes.
Which is one of those little plastic containers that has a roast chicken
in
it. You might get it at the supermarket as well, and you take it home, it's hot. You don't want to eat it right away. Can I leave it on the counter for those 2 hours?
Yeah, you can.
In the hot bag?
You've got to count the time you took to take it home.
Okay.
So, it took half an hour to get home on the train or in the car. That's half an hour into your 2 hours.
Take me everywhere, Gary.
So this
half an hour
a sedan chair, surely.
As I whip my my rickshaw boy. And then, so half an hour to get home, 90 minutes at home. And should I leave it in the bag? Because sometimes I wonder that's like festering and I should take it out of
No, it is starting. It will fester if it's in there, particularly the stuffing. So when you're going to cool something, this applies to the turkey and to the chicken. You need to break it up. It should be no thicker than 1 inch if you're American, or 2.5 centimeters if you're not. So you need to break it in portion. Effectively, you need to get the chicken and cut it in half. You need to portion up the turkey, because if it cools down too slowly, some of the bugs that produce the poisons will actually start growing.
Okay, so when I get my bachelor's handbag home, cut the chicken up.
Yep.
Now, don't wait until I'm about to eat it in an hour's time.
You can eat it. You can leave it for 2 hours. So if you've got half an hour to come home, you've got 90 minutes to do something with it.
Okay.
And then the leftovers you break up and put into the fridge. The ham is slightly different because the ham's one big chunk.
Right.
And so really the bugs are all on the outside. So when you put it in a ham, you can sort of leave as one big lump.
But if it's warm and it's cooling, isn't there some point between the outside and the inside that is like at an optimal temperature for bugs to fester?
The one advantage ham, and it's really only ham and loins of bacon are probably the only two products these apply to. That pink color, the sodium nitrate in it, that actually prevents the spore formers growing. So the bugs that will produce the toxins don't grow in ham and bacon because the chemicals, the nitrates and nitrites that turn it pink, stop the babies of the ones that produce toxins from growing. So ham and bacon have got something slightly different. We can ideally, bugs on the outside is still there. So all the things where people have coughed on it and, everything that fell on it while it was open, they will grow on the outside.
Right.
So you should still be putting it in the fridge, but the ham is slightly different. We don't have to break it up because the preservatives, the nitrates in the ham will actually stop bugs growing in the middle.
Got it. Okay.
You have to cook all the way through to kill the bugs.
I don't cook my T-bone steaks all the way through.
Well, T-bone's actually 2 whole muscles. So
right, but I gnaw on the bit between the meat and the bone.
Well, hopefully if you've cooked it well enough, the bone is still okay as well. If it's really pink right near the bone.
Yeah,
so
it's red near the bone and I'm gnawing on it like a dinosaur.
There's a type of cut less cooked than rare, which is called blue, which is where you get the steak or whatever it is and actually let it warm up to body temperature, which is how you're supposed to eat it. And then you just pan sear it. And the idea is all the bugs are on the outside. So pan searing it, you can eat the steak.
Yes, essentially raw.
And then I was recently in Japan, and you can get chicken variation of that. So you can get a chicken breast fillet done pan-seared as well, raw in the center, which in America, in Australia, you just don't see.
So this brings us to the next question, which is, what about steak tartare or, Japanese cuts of chicken which are raw? Why aren't those making us sick?
There's a couple. Well, let's do the chicken one first.
Okay.
One of the reasons the chicken doesn't make you sick is they usually wash the chicken, which washes a lot of the bugs off. The other thing is they will often effectively do a ceviche on it. They'll cover it in wasabi or teriyaki or soy sauce and effectively surface pasteurize it. Not like the fish ceviche where you put the flesh in.
I love your perfect Latin pronunciation as well.
I did Latin.
Ceviche.
I did Latin at high school.
And the Spanish kind of.
Yeah.
But all right.
Yeah. So I'm talking the Australian way of pronouncing it.
Yeah. Ceviche,
yeah. Tartare. Yeah, steak tartare, mate. So with the ceviche, the acid kills in what's usually pineapple juice or lime juice or lemon juice, kills everything on the outside. Similar with teriyaki, wasabi, and soy sauce, they're surface pasteurizing the outside. Steak tartare is less, because steak tartare is basically warm, usually beef flesh, although in France you can get horse tartare.
Old horse tartare.
Which I also saw in Japan on sale.
What?
And you can get, you get the beef, you grind it up, you often run a raw egg through it.
Yes.
And then you sprinkle pepper over the top.
Some capers.
Yeah.
I love it.
And microbiologically, it's unsafe. And so
it's obviously not unsafe because there are many high-end restaurants that serve it every single day.
Correct.
They don't end up with outbreaks.
California, you have to put a warning on the menu.
California have to put a warning on everything.
That's true.
There's a sign on every single building saying that it contains substances that could give you cancer.
Yeah. I suppose steak tartare, if people who are ordering it, in Australia, you actually, if someone says, you have to actually say it's raw.
Right, but presumably they're treating that ground beef or they're acquiring that ground beef in some way that makes the E. coli less risky than if I just bought ground beef at the supermarket and made one myself?
They grind it that day from whole muscle.
Okay.
So they will do
probably a sterile environment.
Yeah, so
using a sterile.
So they'll take a piece of meat, they'll they will typically drain the blood away because when it's sold in a vacuum bag, there's blood and the bugs are in the blood.
Yep.
So they'll typically take the bag away. They will then typically pat it down to pat away the blood on the outside.
Okay.
Sometimes they will wash it to wash away. Then they will grind it up. And all of that's kept really cold. If you keep it below 5 degrees, then the bugs grow much slower.
The other question then is, in America, where they eat rare burgers all the time, do they treat their ground beef differently?
Yeah, they irradiate it. Yes.
Okay, I thought they did. They irradiate it.
They irradiate
to
it.
kill the
E. coli.
Right.
So hamburger...
Sometimes successfully and sometimes not.
Yeah, occasionally it doesn't work, but usually it does. And that's partly came about with the old Jack-in-the-Box case. In America, I wouldn't say all, but for the big fast food chains, the majority of stuff you see in the supermarkets, it's been irradiated.
Which is not a practice elsewhere. In Europe and Australia.
It's certainly not in Europe or in Australia.
So there are more bugs in our ground beef than there are in America.
Yes.
And irradiation means what? They literally zap it with radiation to kill the bugs.
Gamma rays.
Amazing. Let's take some questions from the Substack. Gary, Dom asks, should you ever eat food that's microwaved in anything plastic? Despite claims of the container being microwave safe, how do we know that chemicals don't leach into our food? My question also applies with any utensil or container that's silicon-based, like silicon egg rings and silicon muffin trays. How food safe are they really?
So specifically with microwaves, let's put it into 3 categories. So the first thing is, if it's packaging that it says cook in the packaging, you bet they've tested it. So things like BPA, bisphenol A, and PFAS, which are both in the news at the moment in Australia and in America. 20 states in America have banned PFAS. It's being looked at being banned in Australia. It's going to be banned in Europe. So
what is it?
Teflon and Scotchgard are 2 brand names. Right. They're basically forever chemicals that are linked with cancer.
Uh-huh. There is another question about this actually, which I might as well throw in now, which is, Scott says, should we be concerned about frying with non-stick pans?
That's Teflon, and Teflon is a PFAS.
Does it come off into the food? I mean, obviously it does, because my non-stick pans sometimes get scratches in them.
When it burns is the issue. When it stays...
What could possibly go wrong? Why would it burn if it's on a frying pan?
On a frying pan.
It won't be exposed to heat or anything.
No. Teflon's actually very heat resistant as well, which is one of the reasons it was put on fry pans in the first place.
Okay.
It was the guy who invented its wife who suggested being put on fry pans. His first thought was putting it on fishing reels, so fishing reels didn't catch. And his wife said, how about fry pans?
Well, she was either clever or a mass murderer, depending on
your viewpoint.
Depending on how Teflon has been contaminated.
Depending on how history will view her. Yeah. When it comes to a non-stick fry pan with Teflon on it, while it's still intact, and it's been used for 40, 50 years now on fry pans, we would have huge rise in cancer if it was the issue.
We have.
Even not really, not in stomach cancer and things like that this would be linked to. If anything, those sort of things are dropping as we go through as a percentage of the population.
I thought our survivability was getting better, but our diagnosis was still more cases. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, I had dinner a few years ago with someone who embalms, and he said bodies are lasting longer than they used to. Literally. And he said it's all the preservatives in the food. He's actually preserving bodies later. So
I'll take it.
Yeah. In fact, I worked in a small goods company. We're having such a good chat. A waiter came up and said, we've been asked if you could stop your conversation. Between a small goods person and an embalmer. There's a lot in common there. Anyway, let's get off the subject. Teflon saucepan should be okay until you burn it or bits of it start coming up. You don't want to consume the Teflon. And the recommendation is on a non-stick saucepan. As soon as you burn the Teflon, throw the saucepan away.
Right.
Sales of Teflon saucepans have dropped substantially.
There's also a good alternative to Teflon, which I bought last year, which is ceramic. There's a ceramic that you can get it's not a ceramic, it's metal, but there's a ceramic coating on the inside, which is also non-stick. It's more expensive.
It's like a baked enamel.
Yeah, that's right. But it's also non-stick and it doesn't come off and kill you. So on the question about cooking in a plastic container, buy a plastic container at the supermarket, put your beans in it overnight.
You should be okay. And I say this because the Australian Consumers Association went out and bought typical brand names. They bought Tupperware and Decor, who are probably the two biggest brands here.
Right.
And they microwaved the bolognese sauce 100 times. Literally the same sauce. They microwaved and cooled 100 times and then tested the bolognese sauce for plastics and found nothing. So plastics that are meant to be cooked in are going to be fine.
Okay.
The issue is the plastics that are not meant to be cooked in, where you've just taken something and it was never meant to go through a cooking cycle.
Right.
Those are not designed and they can break down.
I would assume, though, that most of the things that you're buying at the supermarket that are meant for more than one use would be microwave safe, right? It would only be if you're getting, I don't know, something you got a punnet of strawberries in and you're using that in the microwave or something.
I tell you, one they have banned in this country is polycarbonate from that. Now,
What's that?
Polycarbonate's that hard plastic you associate with water cooler bottles.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And it's made, there's lots of hard things. Sunglass frames are made from polycarbonate. It's a much harder plastic.
I never heat my bolognese in sunglasses frames, so we're okay.
Well, the polycarbonate used to be used here for babies' bottles.
Oh, jeez.
And of course, you do heat and cool and heat and cool and heat and cool a baby's bottle. And the chemical bisphenol A, which has been linked to autism, and BPA, if anyone knows those epoxy glues where you mix an A and a B together,
and they
form an incredibly hard. One of those, A or B, I should know, I don't. One of those is high in BPA. It's a thing that firms plastics. So it's, if you know what an epoxy, those hard epoxy floors, you see them regularly. That is bisphenol A is in higher levels there. So polycarbonate has higher levels than that. And the problem is if you heat and cool and heat and cool and heat and cool, you start breaking down the plastic and this chemical can come out. So in our country, they've banned it in babies' bottles. There are current changes to laws in the United States, the EU and Australia, where they're looking at significantly reducing the level of this. Your third category is, well, let's call it cling film, for want of a better term.
Yeah,
I've been using a brand name.
Glad Wrap. We're not on the agency anymore.
Glad Wrap is the most common brand name here. So they've also choice
Saran Wrap.
Saran Wrap in the Americans. Look on a lot of people know you cook in that as well, and so the commercial brands of that are what you are okay. What we're looking for in a plastic you shouldn't use is a plastic, let's pick something stupid. You decide you're going to use a leftover chemical bucket or an oil can.
And the paint tin.
Yeah. A lot of those plastics that were never meant to house food, they're the sort of thing.
All right, good. We're live on Substack with Gary Kennedy, food scientist extraordinaire, answering all of your questions, theoretically around Christmas, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. You can ask questions live on Substack. If you're listening to this on the podcast after the fact, then go and subscribe on Substack. You can find a link in the show description and you can join all these kinds of things live and get involved yourself. So we've done turkey, ham, reheating things in plastic. On Substack, James says eggs are routinely served with a runny yolk on breakfast menus. For example, poached eggs on toast. Official advice used to be that eggs should be cooked through. In the Australian context, are commercially available eggs from a supermarket perfectly safe to serve and eat with a runny yolk?
Yes. Now, we're talking something slightly different here. The New South Wales Food Authority, our home state, published information on this. The bug that we've got to worry about is the bug called salmonella. And salmonella is basically found in the intestinal tracts of birds. And anatomically, this isn't quite correct because the egg comes through the usual set and poo comes through the cloaca. Where the get a kick up the clacker comes from that term.
Okay, great.
And so pretty much the egg comes out the chicken's bum. So the outside of the egg will have salmonella on it quite regularly. Now in Australia and many other countries, you have to wash eggs. So you wash most of the poo off.
Meaning that the egg producer washes the egg before they put it in.
The egg packer.
Yeah.
So it might come from a farm to a pack house and package there.
And when you say they wash it, are they like irradiating it or spraying it?
Just in water.
They're just washing it.
Washing it in water.
In your dozen.
Well, they also have to put each egg gets inspected. In small plants, it's done visually at something called candling.
In plants?
Smaller egg plants.
Okay, yeah.
In bigger ones, it's done with equipment that, like color sorting.
Right.
And anything that's cracked or chipped or pitted or has got something inside, meaning it's partly fertilized or has a blood spot.
Yeah, right.
All of those are taken away and they're turned into pulp.
Okay.
Which is then pasteurized and used in the catering industry and manufacturing industry. But whole eggs.
And would that go into like the eggs that you buy in a carton? Like, you know,
some of it would be
the egg whites that you'll buy in.
Well, no, it's the bulk egg. When you go into the food industry, they sell, 20-liter bladders of egg.
Mate, how gross.
And 1,000-liter bladders of egg where they're all the cracked eggs. So they do all get used.
And if you go to a fast food restaurant and get your egg McMuffin or something like that, is that going to come out of a bag of eggs or is that an egg? Do you know?
It used to be an egg.
Impressive.
Yes.
Okay.
Still an egg. At least in the Archers, it used to be an egg when I last dealt with them. Okay. So the egg, all the bugs are on the outside. Okay. Unless the egg's cracked, but all the cracked ones are meant to be pulled out.
Okay.
So salmonella is actually an easier bug to kill off than most bugs. So they've worked out by scientists working for the New South Wales Food Authority. He did all the studies, and if you cook an egg and the white is firm, and the yolk is starting to thicken but still runny, you've killed all the salmonella and that egg's safe to eat. Okay. So your person who said in the restaurant the yolks are still served runny, provided the white is set, the yolk can still be runny and it'll be safe.
Got it. And there's a difference, I understand, between different jurisdictions, different countries here about whether or not they clean the eggs. So is it the case that, and there's something to do with with keeping a cold chain and whether you can keep eggs out of the fridge as well here. What's that? Remind me. In Europe, they don't clean the eggs, and that means you can leave them out of the fridge because they still have like a film on them that's protective or something.
Yeah. Australia went the other way.
Australia and the US,
we
clean the eggs, but that means that we have to refrigerate them.
Correct.
Because they'll go off because they have the natural protective layer.
Correct. Okay. So it's, I suppose Australia and Europe, we have a history.
Australia and the US.
Sorry, Australia and the US. We have a history of eating raw eggs. They're in tiramisu, they're in chocolate mousse, bodybuilders do them, egg flips.
Yep.
There's a whole, we do soft-boiled eggs and runny poached eggs and all of that. So Australia and America have a history of eating raw eggs. So in both of our countries said, we're going to wash most of the pool.
French do as well, surely. Yeah. The English, they dunk their, toast soldiers into their egg yolks.
Yeah, they do as well. But I suppose, again, different salmonellas in different parts of the world. Right. And unfortunately, America's got the nastiest one of all.
And remind me, but some staggering number of Americans are hospitalized each year with E. coli and salmonella, right? Which is higher than in other rich countries?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people a year.
Right. And why is that? Is that because of their rare hamburgers or?
It is partly.
Yeah.
You would like to say being such a developed country, food handling's great. One of the advantages of Europe and Europe and Australia is, you don't get minimum wage in restaurants and fast food. And so
the minimum wage is a lot higher.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's mandatory training in Europe and in Australia. If you work in a restaurant or even a school canteen or even a sausage sizzle at the hardware store that we do down here, all of those, there's mandatory food safety training in Australia and Europe. That doesn't occur in America.
Man, if it did, Elon would be getting rid of it with his Department of Government oversight or whatever.
And so
Doge.
Because
red tape.
The wages in America are much less and you pay what you pay, you get what you pay for.
Right.
And there's no mandatory requirement for training. That in America, they've got a higher incident per capita than we do in Europe or Australia.
Fascinating. Oliver has just chimed in with another question about eggs, saying, are eggs treated differently in Japan? I saw something recently about how Japanese eggs are tastier and last longer. They eat a lot of raw eggs in Japan.
When we're talking raw versus ready to eat, you can build up a resistance. People who live on farms drink raw milk. They eat the eggs straight from the chicken. It's probably because you got food poisoning early on. You become resistant and you become resistant to the strain. It's like when you catch a cold, you never catch that strain again. When you get COVID, you're usually resistant to that strain of COVID. The same is true of food poisoning. If you're brought up on a farm, you've got food poisoning lots of times when you're a kid and you become become immune to all the strains that are on your farm.
Okay, so we don't know of any particular difference between the type of eggs. We do hear anecdotally that, like, and I know from going and visiting my family in New Zealand, for example, and going and getting the eggs from the neighbour's farm, they taste and look different from the eggs that I get at a supermarket.
They will taste and look different because of you are what you eat. And so
Either the chicken is.
Well, all animals, you can tell the difference in taste and color between grain-fed and grass-fed. And corn-fed chicken is a brighter yellow. So whatever you eat, whether it's pasture or grain or other animals, whatever you eat gets absorbed into your fat and proteins, and it changes the color and taste of what you are.
Okay. If you have any questions and you're watching live on Substack, feel free to ask a question of food scientist extraordinaire Gary Kennedy, who runs Correct Food Systems and travels all over the Asia Pacific advising governments and corporations about how not to kill their populations with bad food practices. We're inspired here mainly because of Christmas and all of the questions that people might have about how long you can leave things out of the fridge and whether you need to pay attention to best before dates and what the difference between best before and use by dates are. This came up just this morning for me, Gary, because my husband, who always tends to do this, not throw him under the bus, bought not much of chicken drumsticks about 5 days ago. And I said, should I put these in the freezer? He said, no, I'll cook them for lunches. And then 5 days go past, and now the use by date was yesterday. And so I sent him a text saying, can you cook those up after smelling them to make sure they're okay? He did, said they smell okay, but it's a day past the use by date. Are we going to die?
Probably not, because it was raw chicken.
Yeah.
You're going to be fine. If you cook them properly. Yeah, that date code, I'd be surprised if it has used by. I think in Australia.
I don't remember whether it said best before.
I think it would more likely have best before on raw meat.
And what's the difference, remind me?
Australia is slightly different to some other places. America's got 5 of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you know what they are?
Oh, yeah.
Here I am on the spot.
No, they have best before, best by, use by. There are 2 others. Sorry.
Okay.
England's only got 1. And
that makes more sense.
Yeah, well,
maybe not.
We've
5 sounds confusing. So we've got how many in Australia? 2. Best before.
Technically, I'd say technically we got 3 because things with an extremely long shelf life, like wine, canned food, doesn't have to put use by or best before. So technically we got 3.
Right.
But when it comes to things that are going to go off or kill you, we use by and best before.
Okay.
And best before means quality. And best before means at that date, it's going to stink. It's going to be stale, rancid, flat, sour, runny, brown. It'll be something you don't want to eat.
Talk to me about my last colonoscopy. Sorry, this is enough.
Use by means food safety here. And use by means this is the last day we will guarantee it's safe.
Okay.
If you eat it after this date, you could get food poisoning because even in a fridge, there are some bugs that grow really slowly. So it's saying do not eat it after this date.
Use by is serious, like use it by this date or throw it out. Best before is like, there's a bit of wiggle.
Yeah. Use by is serious enough here. It's actually illegal to sell after a use by date. So if I walk into a supermarket and see something past its use by date, it's a fine. And even donating it to charity or giving it to the staff to take home is illegal.
What about feeding it to a starving orphan?
That's illegal as well.
Illegal.
Yes, provided as part of a meal service. Wow. So put it in the lunchroom for the staff to eat at lunch is illegal.
Now, Gary, the other day I had
for use by, not best before.
I understand. I found a jar of Bonox, half-empty jar of Bonox, which if Americans don't know, it's sort of like this strange kind of meat liquid paste sort of thing, a bit like Vegemite or something.
Yeah, in the old days, you would mix it with water and drink it as a beef soup.
I was trying to do that myself. And so I opened up and it was liquidy and kind of unpleasant. And I turned it over and it just had a date stamped on the bottom, which was November 2023.
Right.
Now, I threw it out, but then I thought, sure, it's almost 2 years past its best before date, but I'm sure that's not a use by date. Would that have gotten me sick or should I ignore the date?
You should have ignored the date.
Just eat it 2 years old?
Yeah, nothing's going to live. The classic one in Australia is Vegemite.
Yeah.
And Vegemite's 8% salt. Nothing's going to live in Vegemite.
Right.
So
now, producer Dave has done some quick research and said that the other two categories in the United States are sell by and freeze by.
Yes.
Freeze by is good. I like that because I'm always wondering when, whether or not something that I find in the freezer is still good. From Tim, I've been in debates about best before and use by dates on food in stores. I go by the theory that best before is a suggestion. I think we just covered that. Some people swear that eating food several days after it's used by date, the stores put those dates there to make you buy more food. What's the deal with this? Okay, we've covered that.
They do. I will say one thing. There is a fudge factor in. I'm not saying to people eat it the day after the use by date, but they do take into account the fact that your fridge may not be cold enough and you may have spent an hour while shopping to leave it in the back of your car, which is already starting to accelerate. So but
if you have a good fridge, my fridge is fancy, so it tells me that it's 3 degrees.
Very good.
3 degrees is right. It's good, right?
Yeah, I taught you very well there. Your fridge is meant to be less than 5. 5 Celsius. Oh boy, I'm just trying to think in America what that would be.
Americans can figure it out. It's probably 38 or something like that.
I think
39.
No, it's higher than that. I think it's
40.
I think it's about 45, but it's fun.
Really?
Well,
45 would be like 8.
32 is 0.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's just above, if it's a few, anyway, American can figure it out.
We always say it should be cold enough that you can't spread your butter. And you and I had long discussions of when the butter needs to go in the fridge.
Let's go there because this is another good thing for Christmas. I never knew until I started interviewing you on my radio show that butter doesn't need to go in the fridge.
No, it doesn't.
In terms of the aesthetic pleasure of butter, if you're in a hot climate like Sydney, then in summer you probably want it in the fridge because maybe it gets too soft out of the fridge.
Or melts.
Then I discovered these things called butter bells or butter
bells. Yep.
Yeah. So it's a ceramic upturned gigantic egg container thing that you smear the butter into. It sits in a pouch contained by water, which means that the butter is always touching the surface tension of the water basically prevents it from being open to the air, and you can leave butter there for months. I mean, you can leave butter out of the fridge for months, right? Mm-hmm. And it won't make you sick.
I was in Brunei last year for work.
Yep.
And the butter and margarine are all sitting in ambient. They're all on display on a shelf. It's
in Brunei?
Yeah.
Which is right on the equator.
Right on the equator. I'm sure I could have poured it out of the containers.
Okay.
But yeah, they don't refrigerate. In a lot of countries where dairy products are not that familiar to them. So then a lot of Asian equatorial countries weren't brought up on dairy products.
Right.
And so butter, that's a block or stick on the shelf.
You wander around Bavaria or somewhere where dairy does have a long history. And again, it's noticeable that eggs and butter are out of the fridge in people's houses. Laurie asks on Substack, how long do leftovers last in the fridge? Does it depend on the composition of the food? Well, how long is a piece of string? This is a good one for Christmas because there's always leftovers from Christmas lunch.
It definitely does depend on what the food is. You should be able to get 48 hours minimum on any leftover. Commercially, if we were doing this, and I've got a catering industry background and a small goods industry background, if you cook it up to the right temperature, which is 75 Celsius, and you keep it above 60.
At 170 or 175, something like that.
Yeah, and then you keep it at 60 to keep it hot, and then you cool it down within 6 hours, less than 5, which you can do with blast chillers and things like that.
Wait, 6 hours?
Yeah.
How much stuff are we talking about? I can cool anything down within 6 hours.
You won't get a side of pork down.
Right. Really?
And there's some of the big stuff takes much longer than that.
Okay.
Even in commercial,
so maybe I have to chop it up. This comes back to
why you need to cut the chicken in half.
Yep.
If you can do that and then you put it in the fridge less than 5, commercially, you can get up to 9 days.
Right.
So a lot of menu cycles are 7 days, Monday to Monday. And so you can show up and say, I would like, and they go, oh yes, we've got one of these available. And it's one made days earlier.
Yeah.
But at home, the reality is people are always opening the fridge and things like that. So typically 48 hours should not be a problem on anything. But if you do it well, you should be able to get 3-4 days on most products.
Now, this brings us to the other question in terms of cutting things up so that they cool through quickly enough that you're not breeding bacteria on the sort of the inside between the cold outside and the hot interior. rice and fried rice. It's something of a tradition, at least in New York. I'm not sure if it's everywhere in America, that people might go for a Chinese feed on the day after Christmas. A lot of Jews or people who don't celebrate Christmas will go out for Chinese food on Christmas Day itself. You get home, you've got your hot fried rice in your takeaway container in, maybe if it's America, one of those white cardboard rectangles, or if it's in Australia,
with the little wire on top. I know them. Yeah.
Australia or Europe, it might be a plastic container. You shove it in the fridge, you're good to go.
Not quite.
Gary says no.
No, Gary's computer says no.
All right.
Computer says maybe. All right. Rice is...
You've been very adamant in the past about this.
Oh, no.
I'm going to kill my children through my poor rice storage habits.
Depends on the container.
Okay.
All right. And the Americans have a disadvantage here. All right. So rice is really dangerous because it's the bug that grows in rice, a bug called Bacillus cereus, is cereus as in cereal based.
Okay.
It is, it's quite commonly causes a problem because no one thinks rice is bad. People think, raw chicken, fridge.
Yeah, rice is neutral.
Yeah, rice is basic. And
rice is the beige of culinary problems.
Correct. The problem is Bacillus cereus found in soil, and rice grows in rice paddies in the mud. So rice is fairly notorious for having this bug in it. And if we cook rice and we eat it straight away, not a problem. We cook it and we can cool it down quickly, not a problem. So in Australia, rice comes in two types of containers. We have the flat rectangular one, which is about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters thick.
Plastic container.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we have one that meets that 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. And then we have the cylindrical one with fried rice in. And
that is sort of a silo.
Yes, a silo of rice.
Yeah.
And that's the one that is the issue because if we put that whole container of whether it's, and when we're talking rice, we're talking fried rice, boiled rice, but also things like Greek rice pudding falls into this category. So it's, when we get that container, the center of the container is still warm for more than 6 hours. And some of the microorganisms that survive cooking rice will start growing and produce the poison, the toxin, and stir frying doesn't get rid of that toxin.
So even if you thereafter superheat the rice or cook it again, because the bacteria have already produced the toxin, even if you kill the bacteria, you'll still get sick. And what does that look like? Is that the runs? Or is that vomiting? Or
on a very rare occasion, it's deadly.
Really? Rice can kill you?
Yeah.
See, I'm skeptical about this because everyone I know, including me, will get the leftover rice and they'll pop it in a
You've had food poisoning far more than you realise. And look,
I didn't die.
No, well, some people do, particularly now older people.
Right.
Very young kids, but mainly older people. So we've had deaths in Sydney from rice.
Okay.
Where things like where it's been left out in a restaurant overnight and things like that.
Now, a very similar question. Morgan is watching us on Substack and says, do I really have to wait for food to entirely cool after cooking it before putting it in the fridge or freezer?
You should leave it out for half an hour.
Okay. Why?
Well,
isn't it going to cool down quicker if I just put it straight in?
Well, first thing you should do is break it up.
Yes.
So you should break that chicken in half. You should decant the soup. Pizza's going to be fine because it's already flat.
Right.
But if you've got a soup, you decant it, you put it into
a whole chicken,
a whole
piece of pork. Or
so that old 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters.
So it shouldn't be more than an inch thick.
Yeah. What you don't want to put is put a whole lot of hot food into your fridge because all it do is raise the whole temperature of your fridge.
Right. And also, if it's more than an inch thick, like imagine you bought some chopped up Chinese duck or some roast duck or crispy skin chicken or something like that, and it's more than an inch deep, and you put it in.
No, you might as well not chopped it up. You've got to stack the containers flat.
Right. You've got to pull it apart so that each bit is not insulating the other bit to keep a warm bed of bacteria.
So what you've got to do in these is you've got to make sure it cools down properly. If you remember, we were speaking about temperatures and we said the magical temperature to cook is 75 in Australia. However, when you boil, you take it all the way up to 100. Now, bugs don't start growing to 60. if that makes sense, which is why, the hot dog machines, the bain-maries in buffets, the pie warmers in petrol stations in Australia, all of those are above 60 degrees.
Okay.
So what you should do is you've got about half an hour before it gets from cooking temperature down to 60. And you don't want to put all that heat in your fridge because you don't need to cool it down. All you're doing is putting that heat into your fridge, and everything in your fridge is heating up.
Okay.
And we've said what we don't want in a fridge, like opening the door, is everything to constantly go hot, cold, hot, cold.
Right. You don't want it bouncing between 3 degrees and 6 degrees and 3 degrees and 6
Or 3 degrees and 15 degrees if you put enough hot food.
How much chicken and pork am I shoving in my fridge that it's getting up to 15 degrees, Gary?
I don't want to waste that turkey after Christmas, so I put the whole turkey in. Believe me, people do that.
Right.
So what you want to do is you want to get something that sit it out about 20 minutes, half an hour.
Right.
And a good rule of thumb is if you don't have a temperature probe, which most people don't, I do, but I work in this. What most people do is leave it out for 20 minutes, half an hour. It shouldn't still be steaming.
Right.
So if the food is still steaming, it's too hot to go in the fridge.
Or you're sitting in a sauna, so don't put it down in the sauna.
A good rule of thumb is it should put it into smaller containers. It shouldn't be steaming when you put it in the fridge.
And then on Christmas Day in America, one of the things that they love the most, also on Thanksgiving, are all the side dishes that they have. We do that less here, but it's very popular in the States. So, I've got a casserole dish. I've got my green bean casserole, and it's, several inches deep, and I've got the layers the way that I want them, or I've got my mashed sweet potato with marshmallow on top.
To use an American expression, too bad, so sad.
Right. So I have to smear it out before I cool it?
Or cut it into portions?
Cut it into 1 inch wide portions.
Yeah, unfortunately.
No one does this.
Well, that's why America has a higher rate of food poisoning than we do.
Okay. Nessia has a question on Substack. So one of the traditions, I should preface this for American viewers and listeners, which is that one of the traditions in Australia is that we will, if as an alternative to doing some kind of hot thing like a ham or a turkey on Christmas Day, because it's the middle of summer here, a lot of Australians will do seafood, right?
Yeah.
So this summer, I'll be doing a side of salmon. I'll be doing a mango, avocado, and prawn salad. We'll be doing some fresh prawns. I'll be shucking some oysters. That'll be the seafood.
Yeah,
that'll be the
smoked salmon is quite common down here. Gravlax is not unknown.
Nessia says, if I buy seafood, including oysters, on Christmas Eve morning, can I cook it on Boxing Day, which is what we call the day after Christmas, so 2 days later, if it's been refrigerated?
Yeah, it should be no problem at all.
Okay, great. Andre says, cheese is made for aging, so how accurate is a use-by date on cheese?
You won't find use-by dates on a lot of aged cheese. They'll be best before. So the obvious ones, Parmesan, cheddar, the hard cheeses, they will carry best before.
Right. Got it.
And in fact, some of those, some of the Parmesans won't even carry that.
Yeah.
Because they live forever.
Right.
Where you will find a use-by date is ricotta, Neuchâtel, Philadelphia, the really soft, creamy cheeses, brie and camembert sometimes. The really soft cheeses are the ones that carry use-by date.
The other interesting thing that I've learned from you about cheeses is if you have a hard cheese and it's got mold on it, no problem. Cut the bit of mold off and you're good to go. If you have a soft cheese like ricotta or Philly and it's got a bit of mold on it, you can't just scrape the mold off of Philadelphia cream cheese and then eat the rest?
No. And this also applies to tomato paste and jam or preserves, if we're talking jelly, if we're talking to the Americans. So the analogy we use here is the Portuguese man of war blue bottle.
Okay.
There must be an American.
Imagine a poisonous jellyfish that has long tentacles, almost invisible tentacles.
Common on Sydney beaches in summer. Right. One of the joys of a beach in Christmas Day. We do beaches on Christmas Day here. One of the joys on Christmas Day is running across a jellyfish and getting stung. So if you can imagine molds, a bit like this. So when you see a mold, you see a bit sitting on the top, the furry bit. And that's like the top of the jellyfish that you can see in the water. Underneath in a mold are all the roots, literally the roots of the mold. And it's like the jellyfish, it's the roots of the mold to produce the poisons in food.
Oh.
So
you mean I'd be better off eating a piece of mold a piece of visible mold than I would eating the bit that's underneath the mold.
Correct. The bit of mold up the top's not going to cause you a problem.
Is that right?
If you inhale it into your lungs, yes.
Right.
But if you
my nose.
If you ate the mold just on the top, and you scrape the top of the mold off and ate it, you not get sick. It's actually the mold that's underneath that's going to cause the problem.
Might be invisible.
Yeah, it almost certainly will be invisible.
Right.
And so in a really hard product like Parmesan cheese or cheddar cheese, you can cut the bit off and just cut a bit underneath because the hardness will stop the roots going down.
Okay.
The reverse is going to be jelly, tomato paste, cream cheese, where the roots, because it's soft, can penetrate the whole way through. The whole container is going to be poisonous potentially.
Right. So throw it out if you've got something soft that has mold on it.
And in the middle is sliced bread.
Right.
Because sliced bread is in the Goldilocks zone between hard and soft.
Yeah, right.
And so with sliced bread, you should throw away the bits that are moldy and throw away the next couple of slices.
Okay.
And you're probably right to eat the rest of the loaf.
What is mold? What is it? It's not a...
Mold is different from bacteria and viruses, are plants different from animals. Molds are a whole...
Is it a fungus? Is it a...
Fungus,
it's a mycelium, like it's in that family.
Molds and yeast are fungi, along with mushrooms.
So totally different category of life from vegetables and animals. Okay.
So we have plant, animals, fungi, bacteria, viruses are all totally different from each other.
Right. And if I think about mushrooms in a forest, and if you had like a kind of infrared snapshot of what they're doing under the surface, they would have all of these jellyfish-like tendrils that are connecting them like a root system. And that's what you're saying is similar in a mold.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. On Substack, Andrew says, in my experience, the expiry date on milk in Australia is slightly conservative. In the UK, it's very short and very conservative, and the milk seems fine for a long time afterwards. And in the USA, the date seems disturbingly long way into the future. To what extent is this a difference in the product? And to what extent is this a difference in the framework for deciding what date to publish?
There's really no difference at all in the product.
Okay.
And pretty much all...
They're all pasteurized the same?
Yeah, they all use the same temperatures. They all follow the same codes of practice.
Okay.
UHT is slightly different, the long stuff.
Yeah.
But when we're talking just bottles of milk or, pasteurized milk, no, it's all pretty much the same product.
Okay.
In Australia, again, same as on use by, they're a bit conservative on best before date because they know consumers think, oh yeah, that's yesterday, I'll eat it tomorrow, sort of thing.
But also milk is one of those things where, nobody needs a use by date on milk. It's obvious, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not going to get sick from drinking milk that tastes fine. You're going to get sick. You'll gag from it before you'll get sick from it, won't you?
Eating your curds and whey. Curds and whey is off milk. Is off milk. You can eat or drink off milk. And yogurt is just well controlled off milk.
The control is the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I couldn't eat because when I come back from holidays and realize that I accidentally left a bottle of fridge in, a bottle of milk in the fridge.
Yeah, you can curds and whey.
But I can't eat that.
Yeah, you can.
It stinks.
That's the difference between best before and use by. It stinks, but if you block your nose...
Really? It wouldn't make me sick?
It wouldn't make you sick.
Off milk wouldn't make me sick?
No, it wouldn't.
When would it make me sick? Like how off would milk have to get before it made me sick?
The bugs that grow in milk and curdle it to form curds and whey produce a term known as competitive microflora, which means they grow so rapidly and drop the acidity level, which causes the milk to coagulate and form curds and whey, that the food poisoning bacteria can't grow.
And they're not harmful to people?
No.
It won't give me the runs?
No.
Really?
Psychologically, it might give you the runs, but from a food safety perspective, it won't.
Amazing. On Substack, another question from a viewer, Casper, says, my partner is reading a lot about nutrition for our children. She's read a book that has convinced her that soy-based products like tofu are harmful for our daughter, specifically due to trypsin or other enzyme inhibitors, exposure to glyphosate from Roundup-ready GMO varieties of soybean, and ferric acid levels that impact mineral absorption. My biggest concern, though I plead ignorance on this particular point, is around plant estrogens in soybean impacting endocrine systems, as I've heard that it can cause infertility later in life. Any advice on how to talk this through with my lovely partner?
don't have an entirely soybean diet would be have a variety of foods. One of the good things about having and I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a nutritionist, but I know, and I did it as part of my degree. One of the reasons they say you should eat a bit of everything is foods counter each other out. So there are some foods that have good effects to counter out some of the bad effects. So to talk about everything that listener's done would be an entire podcast on its own, because each of them's an individual problem.
But would it be fair to say that most of the information online about the hazards of soy-based products is woo-woo?
It's not woo-woo, but it's way over the top. I mean, we could go and find the same problems on dairy or beef or on vegan diets,
right? But eating tofu a few times a week
is not going to be a problem at all.
Not going to be a problem.
In fact, eating tofu a few times a week is probably better for you than eating a lot of other foods. And
right, if you were going to get the protein from meat, there would be less saturated fat in the tofu.
Tofu is a really excellent source of protein, particularly if you're going down a vegetarian path. It's edible. It's really versatile. You can use
all this stuff about GMOs. People hear GMOs and they're like, "Oh, I don't want to eat Franken foods."
There are two, I suppose, partly is get used to it. There's a lot more of it out there than you think there is.
Especially in America.
In America, it's canola, maize are both genetically modified, which means in America where maize is the predominant starch. So things like corn flour, hydrolyzed cornstarch, the major form of sugar in America is coming from GMO.
Right.
Most of the oil crops over there are GMO. Australia, that's not quite the case. We don't have as much. When we're talking GMO and people are worried about it, there aren't many crops here. There are a few. Cottonseed oil comes from genetically modified cotton here. One of the things that is going to happen is if you like, these people think, oh, take a gene out here and I'll put a tomato in a fish and things, or vice versa, things like that. There is a lot of manipulation of genes done quite regularly to enhance things. For example, citric acid has been made now for nearly 100 years by a bacteria that produces citric acid. So there's lots of particularly microorganisms where they've taken a gene and stuck it in a bacteria, and that bacteria produces something. Now, this is the main thing in vaccines. Oh, we shouldn't have got onto that subject. But most vaccines are made this way. Vaccines in the old days, you'd have to kill a cow to get the thing out, or a horse to get things out. Most vaccines aren't made that way these days. Most vaccine, you take the bit you want, you drop it into a microorganism, usually a bacteria, sometimes a yeast or a mold, and you produce vats of it and you extract it out that way. A huge amount of pharmaceuticals are made using GMO.
Right. But just to get to the punchline, this is not something that we should be concerned about in terms of
I'm not concerned about it.
Put it this way, there's no scientific data that suggests that it's deleterious to our health.
Correct. In Australia, all fruits and vegetables are allowed to be radiated, which it falls into the same category as GMO.
Why does that fall into?
Only because people say, it's radiation, so it falls into the same category.
But like the tomato gene spliced into the fish is, I think, different from, like, people understand that radiation has its downsides, but it freaks them out less than hearing that, Monsanto has created a Roundup Ready, type of thing, and they don't care about people's wellness, and it's going to turn us all into 5G zombies or something because we're eating DNA that just does not belong in that place. That is misguided nonsense, isn't it?
Well, genetically modified in the sense of, gene splicing different. It's been around now since just after the Second World War. So
just not doing it in a lab, but doing it with the plant itself.
Yeah, in the field trial with the plant itself. Yeah. It's been around for 60 or 70 years now, and we haven't seen a huge rise in mutations and genetic deformities.
No. And even new GMOs have been around for 20 or 30 years in terms of doing it in the lab and all this stuff. Okay.
We will, what we're going to see in the next few years is we're going to see some very, very targeted GMOs. Where they're going to extract, things that will produce vitamins and minerals and amino acids, a lot of nutrients. And they're also going to find obscure plants and animals that have got something in them we really want and then genetically modify them so they produce huge amounts of that.
If you're just joining us on the Substack app, you can still ask a question. We have a few minutes left with Gary Kennedy, who's a food scientist, who's telling us everything you need to know about not killing your family by accident this holiday season. If you are listening to the podcast, then you can just download the Substack app, enter your email and start subscribing. You'll get all kinds of bonus content. Even if you're on the free tier, we'll be doing a lot more of this in 2025. On Substack, Aaron says, are seed oils as harmful as Joe Rogan suggests? And Jeremy says, is Joe Rogan as harmful as seed oils suggest?
I haven't heard what Joe Rogan said about seed oils.
I think he's being used as a proxy here for a certain kind of sort of Silicon Valley style tech bro, health, wellness, Andrew Huberman, Peter Attia sort of seed oils are terrible for you. So find your oils somewhere else.
When you think about oils, they basically fall into three categories. You've got your animal oil, saturated fats, lard and dripping fall into that category.
Hello.
Yeah. Then you've got your hard plant oils, coconut, avocado, palm oil fall into that group. And pretty much everything else is seed oil. So your canola, your sunflower, your safflower, peanut, which technically is not a seed, but is, or almond, macadamia, all of those, sesame are all seeds. In the vast majority of oils sold in this country, even cottonseed, are all seed oils.
Right. And most of the fried food we get would be fried in seed oils. Is that right?
Virtually everything. Any seed oils, because they've got less saturation, they're more polyunsaturated, they're more monounsaturated. So they're liquid. Saturation, what they call saturated fat, makes the fat go hard.
I see.
So palm oil, coconut oil, lard are saturated fats.
Well, when I can buy a bottle of coconut oil, can't I?
Yeah,
or is that mixed with something to keep it liquid?
It's mixed with something to keep it liquid.
And when I buy generic vegetable oil, when there's a big, container of cheap vegetable oil, what is that?
It's whatever's cheapest at the time.
But it's probably seeds.
Oh, almost definitely seeds.
Right.
Yeah.
They haven't squeezed oil out of an eggplant.
No.
Okay.
No, eggplants are one of the things to consider, you know the price, you want to go buy macadamia oil or sesame oil, it's far more expensive.
Yes, right.
So vegetable oil is going to be the cheapest one. In Australia, it's often cottonseed oil, which is a byproduct of the cotton industry.
Okay. And so have you heard about this sort of chatter about seed oils supposedly being bad?
No.
Why? Okay.
No.
All right, but you're not aware of any reason why you would prefer a saturated oil, a saturated fat oil.
Well, in fact, saturated fats are actually bad for you.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But if you had a choice of using either sunflower oil or canola oil or something, or avocado or macadamia.
Do you know, most people can't tell the difference.
There's no biological difference in terms of your health. You're not a dietitian, but in terms of
most of those oils, whether the cheaper ones, canola, safflower, sunflower, blended vegetable, cottonseed, maize oil, which is more common in America, it's quite rare in Australia. Those are all pretty much of a muchness.
Okay. Alex asks on Substack, why are so many foods wrongly designated as fruits or berries? I've done some research and recently found out that strawberries and raspberries aren't berries, but pumpkins and chilies are berries. What's up with that?
There's two schools of thought here. There's biology versus general usage. And so general usage takes over. Anything with a seed in it, the fleshy part of a plant containing the seeds is a fruit. So pumpkin, capsicum, pepper for the Americans.
Bell pepper or
bell pepper. Jalapeno is a
berries,
fruit.
are they?
They're fruits.
They're fruits.
And strictly speaking, I'm just trying to think, what are the other ones? Cucumber is a fruit. Whereas, if it doesn't contain the seeds, it's a vegetable. So rhubarb, pineapple are both vegetables.
I see. Okay.
So, and then within that, there's berries and grasses, and and different people classify them differently.
So who cares? I mean, Alex is worried about the strawberries and the raspberries, but it's got berry in the name.
Yeah.
Call them berries. You know where to find them in the supermarket under the berries.
Peanuts and coconut aren't nuts.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, peanuts are legume, coconut's a seed. I mean, there's a thing between biologically what they are, and even within, the fruit, vegetables, legumes, fungi.
Oh, yeah.
Mushrooms are fungi. It's not actually a vegetable, but it's called one. So it's really confusing. And so I just prefer to say, well, whatever you think it is correct.
Last question from Substack. This is a topical one. Jess says, what can Gary tell us about the recent instances of alcohol poisoning in Laos and Fiji, and how can it be avoided? If you haven't followed these stories, there have been a couple of instances in recent weeks of Australian tourists dying from, or I'm not sure about the Fiji case if they died. They certainly got sick, really sick and hospitalized from alcohol. In Laos, it turned out to be
methanol,
brewed alcohol. In Fiji, we don't quite know because they said the authorities said that it was that these were prepackaged alcoholic beverages that people were drinking at a 5-star resort bar. What do we know?
In the Lao case, where an American did die, so it possibly did make the news in America, and there was a Brit as well died, and 2 Danes, 6 people. Methanol is an alcohol, like ethanol is an alcohol. Your problem with methanol is your body really metabolizes it badly. You do find methanol, one of the reasons you get a splitting headache when you drink wine the next morning is wine does have a small amount of methanol in it. It's part of a natural fermentation. When you ferment, you're just breaking up all the chemicals and making lots of nice flavors and aromas. You also produce a lot of ethanol. You produce a small amount of methanol. And so a really cheap and nasty wine will have a higher methanol content, which is why you wake up in the morning with a whopping great hangover and a throbbing headache. It's the methanol content. What's happened in methanol's cheap. It's an industrial product. And so if you're...
Is that in methylated spirits?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Is that why a cheap drunk might drink methylated spirit?
In fact, it's where the term blind drunk comes from. Because if you drink methanol, it can cause permanent blindness.
Oh, right.
And a temporary effect is your vision blurs and you can't see. Long-term effect, apart from dying, is a long-term chronic effect is you lose your sight. Where blind drunk comes from.
Does it have the same psychological effect of ethanol in terms of drunk?
Yes, it does.
Feels like you're just getting drunk.
It feels like you're getting drunk. And your problem is, like ethanol, methanol is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. So
but booze doesn't seem tasteless.
Ethanol does. If you drink, you just drink ethanol, I'm not telling anyone go drink ethanol, but if you just drink ethanol it's like water.
Really?
Yeah, it has no taste, no odor.
What is the harsh catch in your throat, sensation of drinking alcohol then that is so hard for non-alcoholic cocktail manufacturers to replicate?
There's lots of other stuff in there as well. Your average...
Why can't you just put that in there without the alcohol? Sure, I've always been convinced that the alcohol is doing some flavour.
The alcohol's got a slight burn to it.
Yeah, right. Does ethanol have a burn to it?
Yeah, they both do.
So it's not water?
No.
It's burning water.
It's burning water. Okay. But it will still not have a huge taste.
Right.
Yeah? And it really has no odor and it has no color. So if you adulterate and put cheap industrial methanol into expensive, Absolute vodka or Johnny Walker, and pretend it's that, people won't be able to pick up.
I see. They won't taste it. It'll just have the same burn.
Particularly in clear spirits, things like gin and vodka.
And this is what was happening in Laos.
And that's what's happened in Laos.
Right. Okay.
They have adulterated. They put methanol in, and
presumably unwittingly, they just made alcohol. They made booze in a bathtub and didn't get the recipe right. Or
well, I'm sure we'll hear about it. Supposedly there's a factory where it's all come from. One factory, and it's not unknown for it to be done deliberately.
Really?
Yeah, because it's cheap. Yeah.
Right, and they think they can get away with...
It's food fraud.
Yeah, right. Food fraud. I'm not even going to get into seafood fraud because that'll be a whole other thing.
Oh, yeah.
Fish being labelled as things that they're not.
Olive oil, red wine, Parmesan cheese are all part of food fraud.
But I heard a claim about hangovers with regards to methanol and ethanol, which is that the reason why hair of the dog works, having an alcoholic drink in the morning after, that people say that gets rid of headache, is because your body processes ethanol before methanol, and that the hangover is your body processing the methanol. If you top it up with more ethanol, then it'll start processing the ethanol, and that will take away the headache until it starts processing the methanol again. Is that plausible or bullshit?
It's plausible. Your other thing is you're diluting the methanol in the ethanol. So
you're adding more ethanol.
You're adding more ethanol. You're diluting the methanol. So the methanol is taking longer to go, but you're not noticing it because you're processing, and you're drunk again. So you're not.
It's an anesthetic.
Yeah, you're not noticing that you're
fabulous, Gary. It's great to see you again. I guess we should just wrap by, what are you having for Christmas feast? Do you have any advice or final words of thought for people all over the world?
I'll be doing Australian family Christmas with 18 people, and we will be having ham, turkey, and prawns. all of the classic ones.
Fabulous.
My final thought, if I had to say one thing,
yes,
and the thing I say, if you don't think the food is okay, don't eat it. It's probably the easiest thing. If you've got any doubt, just don't eat it.
Okay, fabulous. Gary Kennedy, thank you so much.
No problem. Anytime, Giles.
Thanks for tuning in on Substack. Great to have you on the Substack Live. If you're listening, we'll be back with a regular podcast later on this week.